Cheatham, and I'm honored to be your host as we unpack this very, very complex conversation around what does the stock market and the types of movement and trends we're seeing when it comes to the AI bubble bursting, and how does that translate into what you should be doing with your business strategies. So first and foremost, if you haven't joined us before, welcome. We do this live every Friday to kind of talk about what we're seeing in our actual work as opposed to kind of what big software hype is selling you. And that's the goal of this conversation. It matters more what you guys say in the comments so that we can start to have those conversations around what insights are working in your environment. Technology strategy is as unique as our human DNA, right? It works differently and prescriptively for every single organization. So I invite you to share any sort of questions or insights in the comments. The important mission of this live stream is to come together as a community and start to share things that, traditionally have been hidden under the underbelly of the software world, right? We can't talk about it. So with that, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Dan Krug, who's a partner here at the Confluential. And Adam is out actually doing client work today. So he stepped in, and I think he's an excellent choice to talk about this, especially bringing that executive and organizational perspective to the conversation. So good morning, Dan. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'll let you do just a quick intro here in just a second after we go over logistics. But just as a reminder, we're live on a variety of different platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, all of the above. And all of the comments aggregate into one place so we can see them. I'll pop them up on the screen when they start to come in. But I am very interested to hear from you guys. Do you think, as an opener question, that the AI bubble is bursting, or is this just a healthy reset? Love to hear your insights to kind of set the groundwork for this conversation. So with that, Dan, if you wouldn't mind doing just a quick intro of your role here at the Confluential, your background, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So Dan Krug, I spent 30 years in industry, the bulk of it in the steel industry. My last roles in the steel industry, I served as a senior officer leading both information technology and human resources for the nation's largest steel producer. 2.5 years ago, I departed that role and started my own business. And as a part of that endeavor, have partnered with the Confluential as we have a lot of synergies in how we engage businesses to integrate technology to create business value and differentiate them from their competitors. And it's an exciting time to be a part of this. It's an exciting topic because there's a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And I think a part of what we do is bring clarity to that.
Absolutely. And it's less about what's happening on the market level and more about what's happening in your organization. And that's what we'll kind of dig in today. I see some of those comments coming in. Thank you so much for those. So let's start with what's going on. What are we actually talking about? So we saw, and feel free to jump in, Dan, if you have updated stats. Mine are from yesterday in my notes. So we have 2.4 trillion in market value that was lost from AI tech stocks. And we've seen a lot of that movement since really late October, right? And we've got a lot of conversation, whether it be in the media or just in industry in general, about, is the AI bubble bursting? And so we've seen the NASDAQ surge from 50% from April lows, and now it's down 5% for the month. It's having these crazy whiplash swings, right? Specifically around these tech stacks. So we saw companies like Palantir drop pretty significantly when it came to stocks earlier this week. And then we also saw NVIDIA, with the revenue jumping over 60%, their stock is still going down. They lost double digits this week, which obviously they're a large AI player. So what we're thinking here is that the AI bubble is not getting the investment that it was, right, in early 2025. and how that really reinforces this idea that we're seeing in strategy execution of how overextended expectations are put on either technical teams or business teams by leaders to produce this kind of fantasy AI that's going to be a silver bullet around kind of solving for the business. Anything to add to that while I go into like why this really matters for us?
Oh, I think it's interesting, to add on to some of your observations about the market. You look at some of these companies' earnings over the last few days, and the earnings are good.
Yeah.
Nvidia's earnings are great. Palantir had a good release. There's a lot of good earnings out there, and I'm sitting here looking at stock tickers right now,
Mhm.
and today is the same as yesterday.
Yeah.
It starts in the green and then falls like a rock in the lake. And I think there's an attempt for optimism, but there's a lot of uncertainty. While the earnings are still good from the big tech companies, I
Mhm.
would suspect there's a question of the realization of value in broader business from AI, and is that going to sustain the AI run? And
Mhm.
I think people are speculating on when that runs out. And there's a lot of uncertainty about the value that organizations, everyday companies, manufacturers, logistics organizations, retailers, how much value will they actually get from AI investment? And I think there's a lot of questions about that.
Absolutely. And understanding like what is your AI ecosystem look like? Like what partners are you working with? Do you have, a specialized AI startup involved in that conversation? And I think that's a big piece of really what we want to share today is there's always going to be chatter around what's happening with tech stocks in the marketplace. There's always going to be an idea of selling a thought or selling a hype, right? Whether we look at things like blockchain, digital transformation, quantum, all of these different, like, how do you be the cutting edge of your business? And I think that's like a huge ask for a leadership team to kind of consume that hype, be like, I'm aware, I see you, but I'm still going to make the best decisions for my business. And I'm curious, like from your work on with executives specifically in this area, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, well, I think it's really challenging. And I feel like I have a platform to speak from this as somebody who led IT for a very large organization. The amount of hype that was sold to me, attempted to be sold to me, I feel like I have a pretty good experience with that. I bought some of the hype. It didn't work out great. It helped me learn how to not buy the hype. But I think one of the things I see happening right now is there's a lot of pressure coming from boards to senior leadership teams. What's our AI strategy? How are
Mhm.
we using technology to drive our results? I don't think executive teams have great answers for that. They're looking deeper in the organization to find insight and answers to it. And I feel like there's a marshmallow layer there where it gets very fuzzy, almost like some quicksand there. I think a lot of these questions get directed to IT departments. If the IT departments aren't nicely aligned with the value of the business and the key strategic objectives of the business, it's possible you're grabbing technology and integrating it without it really driving the value of the
Mhm.
business. If you're asking your operating leaders the questions around AI and driving business value, I don't think they really understand the potential,
Mhm.
the tools and the applications that can integrate into their processes and workflows that will help them get better. So there's like this triangulated disconnect that's occurring between boards and executive teams, IT departments, mid-level operating leaders that's not getting resolved.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of PowerPoint presentations going to boards that say things that ultimately don't lead to tech integrations that do anything to drive value in the business.
Absolutely. And so I guess picking up on that thread, how do we address that? Right? With what does that start with the board? Does that start with the executive team? Does that start with the actual execution team? Where where do we create synergies? And maybe that's obviously we can't fix the entire industry, but we can certainly give tactical advice in this conversation if you're seeing this in your business.
Right. Well, and I think it's a question of how does the top begin to ask those questions around technology? And I think it probably started, likely in the ERP space, where boards began to ask about these business systems creating synergies, and are we doing that? And they were asking about the system. Are we going to get a system that does wonderful things for the businesses? And how many companies realize the value of an ERP business system from the initial promise? It's just it's zero or a very small number.
Mm-hmm.
But yet boards ask about the system. And I think that's what's happening today is boards are asking about AI. How are we using AI? I don't think that's the right place to start.
Mm-hmm.
The right place to start is around the strategic objectives of the business, and how well they're being executed, and where the potential is to accelerate those strategic objectives and the results around them. Um, Obviously, technology has a role in that, but so do the processes of the business, so do the people of the business. That ecosystem between the people, the process, the technology, and the data has to come together. And I think that's the piece that's missing. So if I'm a board member and the companies that I advise, I am not asking about AI strategy,
Mm-hmm.
asking about the technology strategy. I'm asking about the business objectives and what we're doing. And I am interested in how technology fits into that. That helps me better understand the pieces that are missing in the ecosystem to help the organization make better decisions at the execution layer.
Absolutely. And I think you are a great board member. And so what would you do if that's not what your board is doing, right? Like what is your circle of influence? Obviously, if we're totally misaligned as an organization, and you're in charge of that execution, it might be time to think about exiting the organization. I say that all the time, right? We have this weird kind of thought about loyalty. But if you are in a place to create change, a CIO or something like that, where you can kind of turn the board's head to say, it's less about what AI is doing in the marketplace and more about how we leverage that innovation as a company and the clear understanding of what that execution looks like.
Yeah. So, that's a big question, but I'll start at a high level. I think, um, in boardrooms and executive rooms, that's where strategy unfolds, and that's the primary purpose of those spaces. But as strategy is formed and communicated, it does need to be executed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a person who's worked in large organizations, I don't think people can underestimate the complexity
Mm-hmm.
involved with executing, just an incremental change to an existing strategy. But then you talk about shifting a strategy, which every business has to face at some point. It's remarkably complex. It is remarkably complex. I like to ask the question of organizations, how would you describe your execution methodology?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that defines how you get things done? I would say it's probably 5% of the organizations that I work with that are capable of answering that question in some way.
Mm-hmm.
You can go into a lot of organizations and say, do you have a strategy process? What
Mm-hmm.
is it? And they can tell you. They can tell you all of the functional groups and the processes that build strategy. And then you get to that mechanism of how do you execute it? And it becomes a bit of a black box. And I think it's that black box that's creating the conundrum in terms of technology.
Mm-hmm.
You might have great ideas around technology. Integrating it is a completely different thing. So
Yeah.
I'm a board member. I'm asking that question. We've identified a strategy. We have thoughts around technology. what's our execution methodology? I need you to come back to me and share with me the structure and processes behind execution. I don't see that happening very often.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a critical piece of strong leadership, right? To have that awareness of like, we're missing on some of this level, and we need to relook at, are we actually talking in execution terms, or is this just theory in the conversation? And that's so, so important. So let's get to some of these questions. Again, you can drop your questions wherever you're joining from today. I really appreciate all of these that are coming through. So I'm just going to pop them on the screen real quick. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. They're here, right? So let's go ahead and do this one from LinkedIn here from Avery. A lot of AI stocks were priced as if every enterprise would replace entire workflows overnight. When revenue shows up slower because enterprise cycles are slow, stocks correct, even if an adoption is quietly compounding inside the company. Would you agree with this assessment, and what would you add?
Wow. Okay. Um, yeah, and I do think there has been optimistic pricing for sure. I don't think there's any doubt that there's certain companies out there with optimistic pricing. I think the question I would have is how many cases is there where adoption is quietly compounding inside of companies? I think that's the piece to Avery's question that people are really contemplating and trying to understand. My feeling is at the moment there are not a bundle of companies where it's quietly compounding.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of companies where it's quietly churning and
Mm-hmm.
people are thinking. And the data and the things that I've read suggest that the search for answers outweighs the integration of answers right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think I would add to that, in the understanding of what adoption means as far as revenue, right? I think again, we miss that. We've missed that for 30 years, right? It depending on whether it's an AI system, it could be, predictive analytics, could be business intelligence, could be ERP, could be anything that you look at in your system. We still have leaders that just assume employees want it and assume they want to use it. And that's a big miss when it comes to understanding this marshmallow layer, right, between strategic execution. We can implement a flawless system, beautiful dashboards, technology, but if we don't have an organization and we didn't strategize around how we're going to get that user engagement on board, then we have a whole nother problem. And now we're in debt, right? We've got bad money spent that is an expense for us, an operating expense. And that's a huge issue. So I think if you're in that situation, which we actually are going to get to in this conversation, is what do you do if you've already bought AI, right? Like what if you did the 2025 is the year of AI, full stop, and obviously that means absolutely nothing. That's a sentence, not a question, not any sort of strategy. What if we already spent that money? What should we be doing now as an organization to actually attach it to returns?
And I don't think it changes the answer about what you
Mhm.
should be doing, whether you've bought it or not. Whether you've bought it or not, the root core issues and opportunities in your organization are still the same. They are still the same. My question would be, what are you doing to better understand the root issues and the opportunities to drive value in your business? If you aren't taking steps to do that, your investment is just going to sit there. It's
Mhm.
not going to change. Your sunk cost stays a sunk cost. So the question to me becomes how do you what steps do you take to turn that spend that you've already made into something valuable? What will you
Mhm.
attach it to? How do you actually enable the capacity of your organization to consume it?
Hmm.
And I think we've all seen multiple examples of technology purchases that do not get consumed in an organization, or at least effectively. And that's the question organizations have to be able to answer. How do they consume the technology to get the value out of it to reach the promise? The
Hmm.
people selling it are not going to have an answer to that question.
Hmm.
They're absolutely not going to have an answer to that question.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's a big piece of these types of conversations. I love this question. How should you be measuring the value of AI in your organization? I even add, if you're talking to a vendor of really any sort of technology, a lot of these can be scaled to bigger implementations, or just, business strategy in general. I would love for you to ask this question. How do you measure value of organizational change management in your organization when you're looking at an outside consultant? Because they should be able to answer these questions for you. And it should actually be hard metrics that we're measuring against, right? That's why our approach a lot of times, we go in and people don't want to talk about their current state, which, I mean, we get it, right? Like it's painful. People are, really burnt out around it, but we've got to know what's happening today so we can prescribe the methodology to go on tomorrow. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's none of those types of things. And I think that's a big piece of the missing link between being sold something, it dropped on you, and then ultimately having to decide, how is this actually creating good value in your organization?
Right. Right. Well, and to me, the answer to this, in my mind, is fairly simple. If a steel mill is going to put in a new caster, there's a
Mhm.
capital investment, there's labor that goes into that. You build out the metrics of that project, and there's an internal rate of return. And
Mhm.
you calculate that internal rate of return before you make the investment. You revisit it after you've integrated it to see if you've actually hit your targets. So, does that happen as frequently with the type of technologies that we're talking about?
Mhm.
Oftentimes it does not, because it's less understood by the executive team and the people integrating it as it relates to the business value. When you put that caster in, you're making assumptions about the types of products that you can make, the quality improvements that you would make. You're making assumptions about how you will operate in the future that generate those numbers around an internal rate of return. Whether
Mhm.
it's an investment in AI or whether it's an investment in changing your execution strategy, and going through a change intelligence process to generate different results in your business, in my mind, it's no different.
Mhm.
There's money involved with those changes. There are people and labor involved with those changes. Those things should be quantified, and there should be expected results in terms of how you drive value in your business. You
Mhm.
can create an internal rate of return on an AI project just the same as a piece of capital equipment. You can
Mhm.
create an internal rate of return on a change project that reshapes processes and behavior in your organization to get a different result. You can do those things in the same way, but I don't see them as frequently if it's not a capital equipment purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. With CapEx versus OpEx, right? We had that conversation a few weeks ago, and where, these types of strategic spend should align. But I think you're absolutely right. And that's the core thesis of this conversation, is it matters less what everybody else is doing, matters more that you understand what you're doing,
Right.
right? And you're leading with the data that's unique to your organization, and you understand that. As an executive, you understand that change. That's so, so, so critical.
Yes.
So let's look at, and of course, if you see any over here, Dan, Adam loves to pull out questions. So feel free to pull one out. I had one up here from the remote labor index. So another big one. I know this hides our faces, but I think it's helpful for you guys to see it. If you're listening on our audio format, the question is, the remote labor index shows 3% full automation, even as autonomous tasks lengthen doubles every 7 months. What does that tell us about the next 24 months of human AI workflows in the enterprise. And I think this stat is that 3% of automation, even as autonomous tasks lengthen. Autonomous is something that we don't often see a lot of times in an organization, right? That's like the next level of AI, where we have rule-based automation, then we have autonomous decision making from that type of system, where they not only are measuring that and telling the operator, hey, I'm measuring an issue here with this manufacturing process, but the autonomous task is then going to make the decision to address the variance or something like that. I think for the next 24 months of human AI workflows, we can take that question, Dan, and really focus on the 2026 strategies, right? It's that time of year where you're building that and looking at how do you become efficient, right, by using technology, but still understand that this is a human relationship.
Yes. Yeah. The way we like to talk about it is how does the technology build capacity in your business? If your strategy is to build capacity by just merely replacing human beings with technology, that's a discouraging thought to me. Clearly, technology has a place to create efficiencies. As you do, it's always interfacing with the people in your organization, always, and it should be increasing the capacity of the people that are in the business to be able to do more, for the business to do more. I do think there is a prevailing thought right now, or a set of ideas of how does AI replace people?
Mhm.
And AI will replace some labor. I think it's inevitable that that will happen. As that happens, there's other jobs in the organization that have to improve their ability to add value in different ways. Um,
Mhm.
that's a piece of the conversation that I don't think has evolved as nicely as it needs to. To me, it's a replace this input with this input. I think we're a ways away in most organizations before we really see,
Mhm.
shifts in labor based on AI integration.
Mhm.
Again, I don't see many organizations who have clear thinking around that question that was just posed. I
Mhm.
see the bulk of what I see so far is how do we use AI in our strategic thought process? I quite frankly think most companies have good strategy processes. It might augment that and it may be fine. And I see a lot of companies spending a lot of time training their people on how to create better prompts.
Mhm.
Um, I, I I just don't see that. That's not an AI strategy. That
Mhm.
is something that you can tell your board that we're training people on AI. Good. It's not integrating into workflows. It's not
Mhm.
changing the capacity of the organization. And in many cases, you're just creating a security risk.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, picking up on that security risk and just the misunderstanding, right? That marshmallow layer that you talked about. I'm stealing that. I love that. But when we look at data, that's often the core issue of why we can't get to even automation, right? I would argue that most organizations even struggle to get to a layer at which they have uh 60% automation on any sort of workflow process. And the issue usually relies in the data, but it's not something a lot of times executives want to talk about because it's not the hype. It's an infrastructure. It's a painful process that requires a lot of discipline to go through. So why do you think that is, from an executive perspective, that they have such trouble with making sure that not only can you leverage AI and automation, but that you can create a strong foundation that it actually reads and learns from?
Um, I think I might need some better help to answer that question. Are you asking it in relation to the data challenge that organizations face?
I'm saying a lot of times what I see in the marketplace is we have this pressure on the AI campaign. 2025 is the year of AI. And then we have a lack of support from the executive team on data. It's more of like just figure it out, which, to a point, you got to be able to do. but you need to be able to go back to the executive team and say, like, hey, we don't have the foundations to do this.
Right.
I wonder why that's such a huge gap for them.
Yeah. And again, I'm probably a bit of a broken record on this. I view data quality as a component of the execution layer. Where does data come from? It's an output of your processes. If you have misaligned processes, you're going to have data that does not give you the structure that you need. Getting your data platform right is painful. Anybody who's operated in that space recognizes that it is painful. I've always said that people who willfully choose to operate in that space are a little bit crazy or a lot crazy. A lot of people get pulled backwards into data because of their operational and process strength. So go ahead and fix the data. I've lived this. I've watched this unfold where organizations have felt the frustration of not being able to activate the intelligence of their data in the organization because the data structure is broken. The path to fixing that does require a very intentional execution plan that is hard to execute, and it won't happen over 2 to 3 weeks. So I don't have the data that I want fast enough to make the decisions I want. Fix that, do it quickly. Is there technology we can integrate? It's almost like a broken cycle that never really gets at the root problem of the data. I don't know if you've seen organizations that you walk into and say, "Wow, their data platform is buttoned up tight." There's a couple that I've seen, but it is rare. And if
Mhm.
your data platform is broken, running down this idea of AI as a magical fix is just one more layer of technology that you're going to spend money on and not realize a return.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that has come with that investment in AI data, right? That I can come in and fix your data in 5 days, 3 days, all those types of different things. So welcome back. We lost you in the cloud.
Yeah.
So the piece that we really need to focus on is, what does your data look like? And it's not going to be something that's easy to fix. It's a lot of times like, getting into an exercise routine. It's going to be a learning experience, right? For you that requires discipline. You need to be able to exercise, eat right. You cannot just step on the scale and lose 300 pounds, in an afternoon, right? That's not going to happen, or someone can't give you a magic bullet to do that. That's sustainable, right? So we have to treat it as though it's a piece of governance and discipline in the organization. So I want to transition here to talk a little bit about vendors, but I want to make sure that we get to these questions on the side. So let's do this one, and then we'll kind of transition to talking about what does the vendor pool look like a lot of times in this sort of market shifting. So this question is from YouTube, and it says, what are the early signs or the early signals that tell you when an organization is using AI strategically versus chasing trends? And I'll let you answer first, Dan, and then I'll kind of come in and add any color I have.
So there's a question I love to ask at multiple levels of an organization. It's what's the value that's meaningful to your customers that's better or different than your competitors? Um,
Mhm.
and it's, again, pretty striking how few organizations can answer that tightly. I start with that question because if you're unable to answer that, it's difficult then to talk about the strategic initiatives that are actually driving that value. If they are able to answer that question, I dig a level deeper and ask about the strategic objectives in the organization today that are contributing to that value. Again, it's a minority of organizations that are able to collectively answer that question. So if I'm asking those two levels of questions and I'm not hearing clarity, I think it's almost impossible to suggest that you're integrating AI strategically versus chasing a trend or creating efficiencies in a small spot that don't necessarily bubble up. and create enterprise value or something that the customer would experience.
Absolutely. Can you say the question again so we have it twice that you
What,
asked?
what early signals tell you when an organization is using AI strategically versus chasing trends?
No, the question you ask organizations
Oh,
that they
I'm
need to do.
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm sorry. So the first question I ask, and I ask this of all clients, and I don't just necessarily come out and blurt it out. It's something that I sometimes ask in pieces in multiple conversations. But what I'm after is, what value do you provide that's meaningful to your customer that is better or different than your competitor?
Mhm,
It's the definition of competitive advantage. And I find that if organizations are not aligned around the key driver of competitive advantage in their business, that tells me that there's likely something either wrong with the strategy process, how it gets communicated, and how
mhm,
functional departments in an organization align to it. And it can be any of those things. Um, if they are aligned on that, I then begin to ask about the key strategic objectives in the organization that are driving value around that differentiator.
mhm,
If they're able to answer that, chances are good they have thought through how technology and process and people come together. But that is the exception rather than the rule.
mm,
How often do you walk into a company that's, this is, we'll go back a decade or two, but it's the same today around AI. You walk into a company putting an ERP in and you say, why are you doing this? Well, our old system is outdated. Okay. That's that's not a strategic reason why to do it, and that tells me nothing about the value that you're going to get out of it.
mhm,
That's the most standard reason you hear.
mhm. Absolutely. Okay, that's our homework, my friends, for next week. We will ask you question one, what that value meaning to your customer and how are you different than your competitors? So if you want to pop your answer right now in the chat, I'll also go over to our other platforms and ask you. But as I always say, if you can't explain that in 60 seconds or less, you don't have the answer, right? And that is a big piece to that's your job as a leader. That's your service to your customers, both internally and externally. And it's a big question that showcases why are you using AI? Just to say I'm using AI, or are you using AI to make your business better for your internal and external customers, right? So,
And you can take that question deeper in an organization, and it's a part of our analysis where we get at something that we call thrivability,
mhm,
which is the optimization of an organization's ecosystem to drive value with their customer. If you've asked that question collectively, you'll hear an answer. And then you go into each functional department of an organization, get their perception of the value that's driven, the value they create. And you can get an understanding for functional priorities as it relates against the strategy of the company. And you can find, from a perception standpoint, the levels of alignment and misalignment, which gives you a beautiful starting place to begin to identify processes that can drive better value. Until you do that type of work, both strategically at an enterprise level and then come down into the functional departments to understand perceptions of value and how they fit into it, in my opinion, very difficult to optimize process in the organization and attach technology to it.
mhm. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. We'll keep the comments coming over here. These are great conversation starters. As always, just a reminder, if we don't get to your comment or question, I'll go back in and make sure that we address them. I'm going to turn them off on the side a little bit because we're going to shift gears just a tiny bit, still talking about AI, but we're going to go into kind of what you should expect, especially right now, right? We're finishing out Q4 for the majority of the businesses in the United States. And a lot of times, what we see is vendors kind of pushing you to sign this contract, and they even do that more aggressively when they see the stock market right fall. And this is one thing, especially in SaaS, that we are very passionate about kind of unearthing that underbelly of how these sales work, whether it's like an aggressive discount or bundling, right? We'll give you SAP S4HANA with Signavio for free, right? That's kind of a macro example. But we need to be able to keep our wits about us and decide what's the best for our business, not be rushed to these types of decisions, especially from AI vendors. So I'd love to hear kind of what you guys have seen vendors in the marketplace doing, right, to kind of address this type of industry pressure. And I'll go to you first, Dan, and see if we can't have a conversation collectively.
Yeah. I'd love to see vendors spend as much time thinking through the problems to be solved in business versus standing up a storefront and a story to get people to buy their product. And I recognize you have to create awareness, you have to pull people in, but I see probably mismatch efforts in terms of pulling people in and then delivering. One of the things I always like to do with vendors is look at their background. Have
Mhm.
have they ever worked in an environment where they had to kind of consume the product that they're selling?
Mhm.
What success did they have with it? Frequently, the people selling have jumped from different roles very, very frequently and haven't even seen the technology they've sold successfully integrated into the organizations they've sold them to.
Mhm.
I like to flip the questions to the vendors too and ask them, what do you perceive the value is that we create? And how does your product help that?
Mhm.
Help me understand when you look at our organization, how your solution can fit into our workflows and processes that would roll up to value. And it's you rarely hear people able to answer those questions or willing to dig in to understand deep enough to help you understand how their product fits a potential need that you would have. They have a predetermined solution that they want your problem to fit into.
Absolutely. And I think understanding that experience is so, so critical. I know Adam always talks about, the fancy logos on their PowerPoint slides, speaking of PowerPoints, right? And understanding, are those customers even on your version, right? Are those customers from 30 years ago and they just bring brand recognition to this conversation? And do you know what they're doing now with those systems? That's going to be a huge indicator to understanding what that type of customer relationship looks like, right? And that's going to be a huge piece to knowing if when your go live is going wrong, is in the red, right? What are they going to do? Right? What's their role in that conversation, right?
Yeah. I just heard a big systems integrator talk about a client that they had, and they were, the client has a big name, and the integration was a colossal failure. And I was like, the tone deafness to hold that up is something that I was like, it didn't go well. It went really poorly.
Yeah, I mean, the audacity
Yeah.
never ceases to amaze me, right? Like in those conversations, like, what do you mean?
It
Like
was
this
a
is
train
not
wreck.
right. Like this is not a good thing. Like I love it costs what it costs. It's like, what are you talking about? Like,
Well, and there's another one recently available that become aware of where it is. I mean, the train is completely off the tracks. A recent go live, and
Mhm.
the integrator said, "Yeah, this is just how these go,"
Mm.
and it's becoming standard. You sell the product and you expect it to go poorly, and I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think people should accept that.
Exactly. Because I always talk about, and this is more kind of the TikTok crowd that loves to talk about this, but the only other business that blatantly lies to you in the sales process, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we fired that guy that lied to you. It's all good. And it's like, we don't care, right? The only other type of business that can do that is organized crime, like the mafia, right? Coming to shake down your storefront because you're on a certain block,
Yeah.
Tony Soprano type of work. But like the fact that that's at all like that they feel like they can say that is still so wild to me.
Yeah.
So, we could go all day about the crazy stuff that vendors have said, and I'll try not to swear on the internet. But what about the AI vendors, like right now? So, what are some things to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success as a business when we're talking AI and we know there's some sort of crisis? And I'm just going to mute my mic because, of course, the Amazon man always shows up during these conversations. Dogs are upset. So,
Um, I don't think, again, I don't think that dialogue changes that much. I think, AI brings very different potential into businesses than any other technology that we've seen. And I think AI right now is ready to have a significant impact if organizations figure out how to consume it properly. Um, I don't know that we've seen another period of time in industrial evolution where there is a tool so potentially powerful, with the opportunity to create efficiencies in so many different areas of business where people are so clueless of how to use it. So, I and the potential products and applications to workflows are endless right now. So, again, I'm a broken record here. It goes back to the strategic clarity of the value you provide and getting down to that execution layer. Where is there opportunity in your execution layer? And to me, then the technology vendors are like any other vendor. If you are looking to put capital equipment in a manufacturing facility, you get multiple bids from people who are providing similar products, who can talk about how that product integrates into the flow of your business. They actually have to sell you on how their capital equipment connects into the process flow of your business. They don't sell it as this standalone thing that you have to figure all of that out on your own. Why would it be any different from an investment in technology? Why would you not bring multiple people to the table and ask them to explore what you're trying to accomplish and how it integrates into your workflows? I think that is a necessary thing to do with the technology that is not getting done. If IT is purchasing it and they're purchasing it based on technology merits versus its integration into your workflows and environment, it's just another piece of technology.
and I think to your point, like that level of integration in the modern business, right, is also like it's sold as this like you plug in a toaster, right? Like that is not how integrations work whatsoever, right?
Never.
They create a level of risk and failure points in your overall technology stack, not to mention huge risks when it comes to cybersecurity. Obviously, I mean, our average SAP client has over 300 integrations. They're
Yes.
not something that is avoidable in the modern business, but we also can't allow vendors to just say things like, oh, well, we can put an API on that, or like, we can integrate that. And we need approve it, right? Think about any other product you buy as a business. Would you ever have an acceptable business conversation with someone who cannot show you how their product works? I always like tell you guys to close your eyes and think about Shark Tank. What if you walked into the room at Shark Tank and had no product and couldn't explain how it worked and couldn't at all show that scenario because it's on the quote unquote roadmap? That's ridiculous. And that's how we need to treat these types of conversations when it comes to AI, right? Prove that it can work in my environment. Not so concerned with what you did with Target in '05, right? I'm more concerned of what you do with me today and what that support looks like.
I think it's possible folks can get frustrated with how I'm oversimplifying this, but I keep going back to this analogy of a capital equipment integration versus technology. And
Mhm,
I think, earlier I talked about that triangulation as
mhm,
technology gets integrated and that triangulation shows up in the marshmallow layer. If you think about how a piece of equipment gets integrated in a manufacturing setting, you get bids from several vendors. The people who are ultimately making the decision on the equipment are the people that will end up operating the equipment. It's the operators. And while they will get a firm to help them put the equipment in and get it moving, they're also participating in the installation of the equipment and the start. They're involved in the selection. They're involved in the approval process. They're involved in the training of their team. They're involved in connecting all of the pieces that make that process run. And I would challenge people to think about technology integrations in their organization. Does that go the same way? Is the operator who will actually consume the technology and their function involved in the decision? Are they involved in thinking through the process changes, how they will train their people, how they will extract the value and justify the return? I don't see that happening. It works with capital equipment. They're responsible for it. It's their equipment. The technology should be their equipment as well. If a third party, whether it's a different department or a vendor or whoever is responsible for that, and it's a plug and play, like you said, it's not going to work. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And we have we're on the precipice of an incredible opportunity to create um, incredible efficiencies through the innovation of AI. Um, and I would have hoped that the advent of business systems triangulate people, process, and technology. Um, I don't think the learning has been as great as what we would have liked to have seen.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a healthy way to look at it. I just want more businesses to look at it that way. And I think even like the simple stupid approach sometimes is really helpful because the complexity that comes with software, the anxiety around not knowing how new technology works, it being expensive and having that price tag. I love this comment from Avery. Just because that's how things are doesn't mean that's good,
No,
right? At
no,
all, at all. And so that's the piece that you as a consumer kind of have to buck against that trend in this space of, we need not only engagement of our end users because they're a walking, talking data set, right? The most valuable one you have. And then also we need to understand that there's expectations to us as a buyer, especially when we're in a marketplace where we might have AI vendors or bigger vendors that have invested a lot in AI. I think the Meta stock is a good kind of outline for this. It was down like 4% once it announced Meta AI, went down another 20, right? So we see that companies kind of scrambling to put out these AI options that now aren't performing well. That means that they're pushing it. Just because that's how things are doesn't mean that's a good idea for your
right?
business or your strategy. And I think that's the point of this conversation is though the marketplace will always have noise, right? And as business leaders, we need to be aware of it.
Right.
It does not at all mean that we need to be swooped up in that drama, right, around it. We still need to be good, disciplined business leaders that are ready to do hard work for good innovation. And that's why a lot of times when we build an agent or any sort of AI, we're not at all interested in accessing, the customer's data because a lot of times that's how these businesses will lock you in, right? You can either break your entire technology stack or pay your system integrator for your custom integration for the rest of your life, right? And that is crazy.
It
The
is.
thing, the thing that we always build alongside, the point of a consultant is not to be in your business forever, right? It's for you to be able to either transition them to other partner places in the business where they add value, but for you to own your own AI strategy that's not going to be sold to your competitor 5 minutes after your system integrator built it, right? So,
One thing I'll just pivot a little bit. I know we're about at the end of our time when we talk about how do we do a better job integrating these technologies. We talk a lot about change intelligence inside the Confluential, which is different than change management. And if you're integrating technology, chances are good there's some level of change that's unfolding in your organization. To me, one of the biggest red flags that I see in organizations is that they have this change management group that sits outside of either the project management office or the group of people responsible for integrating the change. If you have a change management group that is separate and different from your project management group, or is operating as a separate island from the people who are actually doing the work, that is a massive red flag.
Absolutely.
That triangulation that I spoke about, that is the ultimate job of change intelligence, is to eliminate that triangulation. Change management is good at organizing communications and doing training. Change management does not eliminate that triangulation. Change intelligence eliminates that triangulation.
Absolutely. I mean, well said. I feel like, I have 10 out of 10, no notes, nothing to add. That is just the way that a lot of times change management, especially change management consultants, can come in and do a whole lot of nothing for a big hourly price. And they, have great PowerPoints again. And there are some, great actors out there when it comes to change management, but it's a practice that has become so diluted as an HR function outside the PMO office that has really stopped adding a lot of value. And that's why, again, we're in an industry where people just think, oh, well, this is just a change management issue. It's like, no, with proper planning, this absolutely could have been avoided, as well as, not only the operational disruption, the dollars lost, but now you're dealing with a human being workforce that doesn't trust you anymore. And that is going to be the most expensive piece to try and earn back, right?
But most change practitioners get good at change because they change firms and employers every 2 years. That's really how they get their practice.
Absolutely. And I've added that to a lot of our thought leadership, is Dan's recommendation of like asking those practitioners when you're interviewing them, how long is your average project? I think that's absolutely genius to kind of look through that type of lens, because if it's 8 weeks, right, then that's not someone we need to be working with, right? These are long, sustainable, often painful type of projects.
Exactly.
So with that, we are up against time today. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us in this conversation. For all of our incredible comments here, thank you so much for engaging this conversation. That really is our mission here at The Confluential. It matters less what we say and more of like what we talk about as a community and what you guys bring to the table with your experience and thoughts as well. So we will see you at the same time next week to talk about, I don't even know what we're going to talk about, but we always post it beforehand, and you join that conversation. If you don't follow Dan or myself on a variety of different platforms, we're constantly having this conversation in our posts as well. I also invite you to come on over to our TikTok lives that we host 3 times a week, which are super fun to kind of see what people are experiencing just in the industry, especially in heavy manufacturing. So excellent. Well, thank you, Dan, for your time. Thank you to the audience, and we'll see you next week.
Big